in Italian order. So today we will talk about the health status of aquaculture species in the scenario of climate changes. Oops. So we have two sections here. The first section is general on aquaculture, and here are depicted the main outlines: composition and growth of global aquaculture production, aquaculture in the environment, sustainable aquaculture, and aquaculture with global changes in the ocean. So we'll start first defining what aquaculture is, because aquaculture is the cultivation and harvesting of aquatic organisms, including not just fish, but also mollusks, crustaceans, and also aquatic plants and seaweeds, for different purposes, for food, research, conservation, also extraction and isolation of bioactive principles, and so on. This practice in Mediterranean dates back to the Romans, around 500 before Christ, because the Romans used to farm oysters and fish in Mediterranean lagoons. And this practice is an equivalent in water to agriculture, involving the rearing of aquatic species to supplement the natural population and meet human demands for food. Here is a recent review, a 20-year retrospective of global aquaculture. You can see here in the map the growth in aquaculture production between 2006 and 2016 for countries with highest production. And on the left, we can see in tons the increase in production of these different species between 1997 and 2017. So the total production is increasing from the late 90s. And here you can see more or less the contribution of fish, mainly freshwater, algae, mollusks, and also marine fish in the lower panel, crustacean and other species. Aquaculture became well integrated in the global food system around the 2000. And from then on, we know already that aquaculture industry has significantly impacted the environment, both positively and negatively. Because the first intention of fish farming, for example, which is the most widespread aquaculture, was to increase food security for human health. But also fish farming showed to have different environmental problems as a result of this activity. The main environmental problems coming from the impact of aquaculture are the release of waste and chemicals in the waterways, the spread of disease to wild fish population, because we will see that crowding of individuals in aquaculture plants can lead to spread of disease, and also for the destruction at the beginning, not now, of natural habitats for the construction of aquaculture facilities. So to address these main concerns we have very clear in mind now, it is essential to implement sustainable aquaculture practice that can minimize the harm to the environment, at the same time maximizing the benefits for human consumption and economic development. Because the demand for blue food, what is blue food? Any food from ocean, rivers, and lakes, is increasing steadily at a global scale. But as you can see here, the global production from 1950 to predicting 2050, we can see that fishery is stable, is not increasing, because there is overfishing worldwide that led to the depletion of natural population. In contrast, you can see that the aquaculture production in million tons is steadily increasing, especially from the 2000s. So given the depletion of wild aquatic resources and ecosystems, aquaculture will play an increasingly important role in meeting the global demand for food at a global level. Aquaculture implies a rearing of different species, different production systems, and different value chains. Today, we will not focus on production system, which is a technical issue, on economic issues, but we will focus on the health of different species, the most aquaculture worldwide. Despite the increasing activities worldwide and the increasing production of food from aquaculture, not all growth, you know very well from this course, that is not sustainable. So it's vital to consider all the opportunities and trade-off of aquaculture development to guarantee truly sustainable growth. So we will see that if aquaculture is developed responsibly, has the significant potential to meet the food demands of a growing global population, but at the same time be representing an activity which is sustainable, nutritious, and equitable. As you can see here, this is the brochure of a recent meeting with from 2022, the Road to Sustainable Aquaculture. You can find the outcome of this international meeting on the web. I will show you many links with different sources that I utilize for this presentation. But as aquaculture industry is expanding, the sector, we have seen that is facing some problem like environmental degradation, and also for land and freshwater aquaculture, also problem of water scarcity and limited availability of space, not only of land, but also coastal areas. And also high input costs, because building and implementing an aquaculture farm is expensive. So in this general view, sustainable aquaculture can be defined as the aquaculture practice, which focuses on environmental, economic, and social sustainability to improve the overall capacity building and utilize land and sea effectively for the aquaculture section. What do we mean for environmental sustainability? Aquaculture should be eco-friendly. It should not impose any significant disruption to biodiversity. Then there is the economic sustainability, because the practice, sorry, I am meeting a new participant to the Zoom meeting. Economic sustainability implies that the practice should be profitable with good long-term prospects of growth for investments. And also social sustainability, because aquaculture practice must be socially responsible and contribute also to the well-being of the local community, because many aquaculture plants act locally and are on a local scale and have a close contact with the local population. So in general, sustainable aquaculture should deliver nutritious food to a growing world population, create jobs and economic development for coastal and rural communities. And also we'll see sustainable aquaculture will help mitigating climate change. And according to most recent studies, sustainable aquaculture must address some main topics. First of all, animal health and disease resistance, which is the topic we will talk in a second section about. Technologies and production systems to increase efficiency. Diversification of species, because we will see that only few species are grown worldwide. So we are looking for new species that are potentially interesting for aquaculture. Management system, and also new eco-friendly fish and mollusk products with high nutritional value, because we see that fish and mollusks are the most frequent species in aquaculture. Talking about sustainability, of course, I am sure that in this course you will have heard several times on the sustainable development goals of the 2030 agenda. But here there is a scheme connecting aquaculture with direct, indirect, and associated or related implication for different sustainable development goals. The direct effects are on 2 and 3, so eliminating hunger and improving health. Indirect, increasing environmental sustainability of ocean, water, climate, land, through responsible production and consumption. So here is the involvement of all the ecosystem, water and so on. Aquaculture can be associated to SDG 1, 5, 8, and 8, and 10, reducing poverty, achieving gender equality, improving livelihoods, and reducing inequalities. Think about Africa, for example. Freshwater aquaculture in some African countries is crucial in their economic development and can reduce poverty and improve gender equality. Related, in the long term, sustainable aquaculture has the potential to produce energy, adding food production also in cities, not in remote countries, and contribute to development of technology and or various partnerships from local to global in different ways. In May 2021, the European Commission published the new strategy for sustainable aquaculture in Europe. This is linked to the Farm to Fork strategy that recognizes the role of sustainable aquaculture in building sustainable food system. This new strategy is crucial for European aquaculture to grow into a competitive and resilient sector and become a global reference for sustainability by 2030. There is a practical brochure online at this link where you can find the 2 documents in any language. The first is strategic guidelines for a more sustainable and competitive European aquaculture for 2021 to 2030. And the second is a new strategic vision for sustainable aquaculture production and consumption in the European Union. So blue farming within the European Green Deal. There is another organization that contributes to development of aquaculture. This is the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, in Italian FEAMP, that is strictly related to Objective 14, Life Below Water, because this is a fund that contributes economically to development of projects that improve food security through the supply of seafood products, the growth of sustainable economy, healthy, safe, sustainably managed seas and oceans. And all these goals are directly related to the goal for achievement. Now we go to the problem of climate changes, because aquaculture, both in land, in coastal areas, and so on, has to face environmental changes. Here, I show you a summary of the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, Special Report on the Ocean and Cryosphere in a Changing Climate, SROC. And in this report, there are the prediction of main changes related to climate change at a global scale. What are global changes? We know increasing temperature, ice melting, increasing the...
Pieno mancino.
Sento una voce, ma non so se parla con me. Posso andare avanti? Ok. The increase in sea level, increase in ocean heat content, decrease in pH, ocean acidification, depletion in oxygen reserve in ocean and in all water body, and we will see also the marine heat waves. here graphs, they look complicated, but these are the projection for 2010 and also here for the 2003 on the basis of historical data, experimental data, historical data in green modeled, and here, most important, in blue and pink, the two projected scenarios. The first is in case of low greenhouse gas emission. The pink is in case of high greenhouse gas emission. That is, if we're doing nothing on the gas emission. But we are looking at the main changes that will involve the oceans. This is the global mean surface temperature in the ocean. So this is the best scenario for this year. This is the worst scenario. This means that the global mean surface temperature is going to increase at least of 2 or 3 degrees in the next decades. The same applies to ocean pH, which is decreasing. So here we have two predictions for low acidity. We know that seawater is alkaline, so we can go below or around 8 points pH. Now it's over 8. In the worst scenario, the ocean acidification can go down to 7.5 pH units. Here is the depletion of oxygen, small for the best scenario and important for the worst scenario. And here we will see at the end of this presentation the marine heat wave days. That means days where the temperature shows anomalous increases over the average of the period. Now we know that in the marine environment, warming, so the increase in temperature, and acidification, so the decrease in pH, will represent the two main environmental stress that all marine organisms will be exposed to in the forthcoming years. And we know that, unfortunately, these two changes will occur together at the speed never observed before in the past. So these main environmental perturbations that derive from global climate change can potentially disrupt the functioning of natural ecosystem, but also of aquaculture ecosystem. Sorry. Climate change in the oceans, like warming and acidification, has not just ecological consequences for the environment, but also heavy economic consequences. Because we have to think that a marine ecosystem provides invaluable goods and services. So as the human population is growing, production and consumption of fish and shellfish that derives from normal fishing, which is depleted, and aquaculture represent one of the main sources of support for economic growth in many countries. So climate changes represent a challenge for future food safety, also on land, for agriculture as well, but we are focusing on the aquatic environment. Since these changes can affect the growth and stability of fish, crustacean, and molluscan population due to the impact of environmental stressors and their interaction. And this is underlined also in the last report of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO project, which analyzes the impact of climate change on fisheries and aquaculture in different regions of the world. What is the impact of climate changes or in general of environmental changes on aquaculture? Here in the center of these slides, we have the production cycle of fish. We start from fish fry, which are the small embryos that are grown in nurseries. And in this way, we can obtain young individuals. that grow into juveniles, adult juveniles, and then they are fed to become larger and to reach the marketable size. Once they have reached the marketable size, which is different for different species, they are used for reproduction to obtain new seeds and new generation. So here on the left, we can see all the general environmental changes that can affect the aquaculture production cycle, for example, on fish. General decline of resources, habitat destruction, eutrophisation, biotic depletion, different ecological effects, fish disease, gas emission. But all these environmental concerns are due to anthropogenic activities. At the same time, indirectly, anthropogenic activities are contributed to climate changes. And so different aspects of climate change per se can affect the aquaculture production cycle. The dramatic events like cyclones or drought, floods, but in general, global warming, acidification, changes in rainfall, this is important for the sea level, but also for aquaculture inland and estuaries, salinity, and in general, the increase in the sea level. So it's a very complex situation where different factors, all caused directly or indirectly by human activities, can affect aquaculture production. Here is a graph reporting the number of publications on cumulative impact of ocean warming and acidification on fish and shellfish. As you can see from the 2010, there is an increasing study to try to understand which is the impact of the main drivers of global changes on biological resources in the oceans. So from these studies, we now know that combined exposure to environmental stressors, like, for example, warming and acidification, or warming and changing salinity, or whatever, can have a cumulative impact on fish and shellfish and can affect all biological systems from the molecular level to the ecosystem level. Here is the pyramid indicating how growth and survival of individuals is affected, because on the basis of this inverted pyramid, there are all the steps that lead to affecting growth or survival. We start from direct effect on molecules, on DNA and proteins and lipids and so on, affecting different biological functions like the immune system, affecting the physiology, the metabolism, the capacity to tolerate different temperature, affecting the capacity to reproduce. And for example, acidification is very important because many aquaculture species are vertebrates like fish, or have a calcified skeleton like mollusk, for example. And all these changes from molecular level can affect behavioral responses of individuals and also alter prey-predator dynamics. So a very complex issue that concerns all the levels of biological organization. So now we know that warming plus acidification can have a number of effects at different levels of organization in fish and shellfish. So in the most utilized species for aquaculture. But aquaculture can have some positive effects on global warming and in general on changes in climate worldwide. Here is an example of how shellfish farming, this could be mussels, oysters, whatever, and seaweed farming, whatever seaweed is cultivated for food or for any other practical purposes. And here we have 4 points that are related to aquaculture. If aquaculture is followed and organized correctly, can have different benefits that are direct on the environment and can mitigate the effect of climate change. We can go through this quickly. The first effect is to mitigate pollution, because algae, for example, can extract the excess of nitrogen and phosphorus coming, for example, from soaps, detergents, and so on. And if we have in the same place also filtering and feeding shellfish like mollusks, clams, and so on, they filter the water and can decrease the turbidity, increase the clarity of the water. The second point is habitat, because due to human activities, some natural habitats are almost completely destroyed. We will see the case of the oyster, because we know, for example, that about 90% of natural oyster population have been lost all over the world. And if planned in a correct way, some shellfish farming can, of course, replete the natural population, but provide the habitat for other species. For example, can protect young stages of fish and invertebrates, and can support in various ways both fish and macroinvertebrate population, which is also a consequence of point 3, because together or individually, shellfish and seaweed aquaculture can provide a refuge for different types of macrofauna. The fourth consequence can be reduction in total carbon dioxide content in seawater. This is due to the seaweeds and algae, increase the oxygen content of the water, and in general mitigate the changes of water chemistry that occur in consequence of climate change. So if correctly planned, some aquaculture activity can restore or contribute to mitigate the local climate change condition. Of course, this applies to a local scale, not to a global scale. Fish farming, for example, can have multiple positive effects on food and energy exchange, and can have an overall positive effects on food webs, because, for example, fish in cages can be fed with different feeds. They release fecal matter, different types of excreta, different wastes, and this contributes to increase the particulate organic carbon fraction in the water that can be used by filtering or suspension feeders organisms on the bottom, and so on. As I mentioned before, if aquaculture is correctly planned. Now, there are rules and indications for spatial planning to choose the right place for the right type of aquaculture impact. So we won't go through the details in this presentation, but aquaculture can be planned and can be placed in different environments to increase the quality of the environment, to increase the health of natural populations, and to buffer in general, as we just mentioned, the impact of climate changes. Last implication of aquaculture is the relationship between aquaculture and this concept of One Health. Again, probably you already heard of the One Health concept in these lessons. This involves human health, which is, of course, at the top of our interest, but now we are aware that human health cannot be disconnected from animal health and from environmental health, because whatever changes occur in the environment and whatever changes suffer different animals that are grown for providing food to humans influence the human health. Here on the right side, the concept of One Health is connected to, for example, seaweed aquaculture and wildlife aquaculture. So you can see that there are positive and negative interactions between the idea that environment, wildlife, and humans are interconnected, and all actions that can contribute to make a better environment or sustainable environment, or that can provide a condition for optimal growth condition of different species that are utilized for food, have a positive consequence on humans. And this is a concept of from farm to fork that we mentioned in the project of the European Union. So just a very simple take-home message for this section. We know that coastal ecosystems are threatened by coastal pollution, loss of habitats, overfishing, and will face the other threat amplifier of climate change. And we mentioned the main components of climate change that can affect local coastal ecosystem. But when we're done in the right way and in the right places, commercial aquaculture can accelerate the recovery of disturbed ecosystems, in addition to providing food for humans, which is sustainable, and also those that are called green jobs in coastal communities. So all these issues are interconnected and can explain how the concept of sustainable aquaculture is extremely important in protection of the environment and also of human health. Sorry, I'll close the window because it's noisy. So as you can see, the first part is very general, just to introduce you to the concept of aquaculture. In the second session, we will go through the biological aspects of aquaculture, and in particular on aquaculture and animal welfare. First of all, we will go through the main aquaculture species globally at the European level. Then we will focus on the recommendation for welfare of the commonest finfish species in European countries. We will see that for these species that are essentially the sea bass and the sea bram, there are regulation and there are calculations that can allow us to predict risk factors during production system for animal health. We will see briefly the main diseases, sea bass and sea bram, and then the last part of this section will be focused on shellfish. We have to say one thing. I don't know if any of you is collaborating or interested in animal welfare in activities, because we know that, fortunately, for scientific experimentation, but also for utilization of species of the economic interest on land, the concept of animal welfare is now accepted globally. So animals do not have to suffer because we exploit them as food, for example. And so the attention to animal welfare is particularly high in Western countries. But now we know, on the basis of scientific data, when animal welfare can be guaranteed and in what conditions, because there are many studies that are measuring through evaluation of different parameters how animals are, if they are healthy or not healthy, if they suffer or do not suffer. However, despite the huge number of scientific papers published on animal welfare in agriculture, in aquaculture, and so on, these scientific insights are not yet included in aquaculture standards. That means that a farmer, an aquaculture farmer, is not obliged to follow all these indications. However, in general, the need of welfare consideration is now included in the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. Of course, the adoption of some precaution and some practices in aquaculture is not dictated by altruism. Sometimes they talk about human treatment of fish. Okay, this is, in my personal opinion, a bit hypocritical. The idea is that if the fish is healthy, the product quality is better, and it reduces the risk of disease, and the propagation of infectious disease in aquaculture leads to the loss of all the production. So we are not often so guided by altruism or humanitarian ideas, but we know if the fish is healthy, also the product is good and it's worth money. Apart from that, we have to admit that there are no recognized standards for animal welfare for about 70% of farmed aquatic species. And I'll show you now some pictures from the review of France in 2021. The title is explicative: Animal Welfare Risk of Global Aquaculture. Here you can see the list of the most common species that are used in aquaculture. As you can see, most are chordata, so vertebrate, finfish, some arthropoda, crustaceans, a great deal of mollusca, essentially bivalves, and then a few other invertebrates. Here is the number of individuals that are reared in different situations. So you can see that the number of fish is very high, the number of crustaceans is very high, the number of mollusca is extremely high. And here in this table, you can see, according to the FAO listing, the main species of fish, the freshwater species, and the marine species. As you can see, they are not very many. So it's 10 species. These represent the most aquaculture species of fish all over the world. But what is of interest in this paper is the analysis on scientific research on welfare. So how many papers are focused on the welfare of species of invertebrates or vertebrates that are utilized in aquaculture. As you can see, for invertebrates, there are no cases of presenting more than 5 publications on this subject. For vertebrates, there are few. Some papers in invertebrates, less than 5, are involved in how evaluating the welfare of the invertebrates. Some more invertebrates. But look at these, no welfare. Most of the studies do not care at all to the welfare of the aquaculture species. This according to the FAO list in 2018. Let's have a look in more detail on the main species cultivated worldwide. According to the State of World Fishery and Aquaculture Report in 2020, we can say that up to 2018, over 600 of aquatic organism species were found across the world. But 600, but only a few species make up of most of the production. For example, 90% of fish production is based only on 27 species. Even fewer species of crustacean, mollusks, and other aquatic animals are found. And here you can see in the Europe, this all over the world. In Europe, here is the production in tons. On top, the mussel, Mytilus, followed by trout, and 2 species of marine fish, the sea bass and the sea bram. And here, in particular, you can see the images of the fish, the European sea bass, Trarchus labrax, and the gilt-head sea bram, Sparus aurata. Then in production tons, they are followed by other bivalves, oyster, carp, oyster, clams, and a bit carp, but the trout for freshwater species in much more produced in greater amounts. When we look at the economic values of these species, it is very high for trout, sea bass, mussels, sea bream, but also compared to production for oyster and of course for tuna. So every time we consider the number of species and the production in ton, we have to have a look at the economic value in euros. Let's go through the welfare recommendation for these two main fish species, marine species, nutraceuticals, lavras, sea bass, and Sparus aurata, sea bream. They are present in all over Europe, from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, but it is the Mediterranean market that dominates the production. In some cases, a single aquaculture plant produces both sea bass and sea bream. But here is the scientific opinion of the EFSA, European Food Safety Authority, on animal welfare aspects of husbandry system for farmed European sea bass and gillhead sea bream. That means that from 2008, we have a regulation, okay? We have indication on how to maintain the animal welfare of these species that are the most widespread in aquaculture in Europe. This scientific opinion is based on scientific data. And on the basis of scientific data, we can give recommendation on how to improve the welfare of fish through different tools. Of course, good housing, good food, good health, and all the opportunity to express the appropriate behavior, because we will see that behavioral observation are very indicative of the welfare of the fish. You can find this document at this link. But how we can guarantee the welfare of these two fish species? We have to take into account different variables. The first is the abiotic factor, so the physicochemical characteristics of the waters where the fish are grown. Temperature, carbon dioxide, oxygen, pH, ammonia, salinity, length of photoperiod, and also the water volume allowed for each individual to avoid overcrowding. Biotic and behavioral factors. Density, there are indication of how many fish of a certain size can be kept in a certain amount of volume of water, because the density affects social interaction and can lead to competitive behavior, aggressive behavior, predation, and so on. Feed, of course, the quality and composition of feed. There are different feed diets. Some are standardized, but there is the market is producing different type of feed to increase the growth and the quality of the product. How food is administered, because it depends on the species, on the size, on the age of the fish. Fasting, we have some fasting, starvation period before collecting the fish. And in general, of course, the rearing practices, the cleanness of the plant, selection, confinement, transport, if it's not allowed, but eventual hormonal manipulation, and also mechanical and noise disturbances that can induce stress in the animals. Of course, disease, the spread of pathogens, and we'll look at the final point, the pre-slaughtering and slaughtering practice. Now, on the basis of these factors, this is in Italian because it's taken from an Italian study where the risk factor imposed by each of these variables can be calculated. For example, in this case, the table is valid for sea bass and sea bream, okay? And here in the studies, the recommendation of the EFSA have been applied. Okay, here you can see the rearing practice, so handling disturbances, kind of nets, light intensity, cleanness of the containers, and so on. And it depends if the fish are kept in cages or in big tanks where the circulation of the water is free or there is a recirculation of the water. For feeding, formulation of the feed diet and how the food is kept before utilization, and also adaptation to the distribution system. And you can see we can, according to this regulation, calculate the risk for animal welfare. Pathology, norovirus, so you receive babesiosis and so on, parasites, and we will go briefly through the main cause for disease in fish. And at the end, of course, was first in the previous slide, the quality of the water, temperature, water flux, hypoxia, water exchange, hyperoxia, hypercapnia, decrease in pH, too much oxygen, low temperature, high level of ammonia. And all these factors can contribute to induce predation among the individual, and also very important, crowding, how many individuals are kept in each condition. And this calculation allows to get a final risk score. And this risk score, the higher is the risk score, the higher is the probability that animal welfare is affected in the aquaculture plant. What are the main diseases for sea bass and sea bram in Italy? More or less the same: myxobacteria, vibrios, different parasites, and so on. In general, the transmissible disease in fish, which are called epizoosis, are due to parasites, bacteria, and virus that induce different pathologies. But now we know very well also the mollusk disease. We will go to this later, and also crustacean disease. Now, the presence of these pathogens in each aquaculture plant is monitored by law. Okay, so we have a list of the main potential pathogens for fish, mollusks, and crustaceans to avoid the spread of disease. Pre-slaughtering and slaughtering. I don't know if any of you have ever thought of this, because we are often worried about the way cattle, for example, is kept on the sea, on land, but we never worry about fish. We have a pre-slaughter phase. This means that when the fish have reached the marketable size, they are connected in smaller cages or nets. Some days before the slaughtering, there is a starvation condition to avoid that the gut is too full of food. And also the removal from water, netting with simple nets. This, of course, can lead to a temporary overcrowding. So from the sea to the boat, it's necessary to collect the fishes. And this is a phase that can cause strong stress condition to the fish. Then slaughter. What do we mean slaughter? You know that because in order to have fresh fish, they are collected in nets and then immediately put on ice. This is the slaughter phase, and in the slaughter phase, what happens to the fish? First of all, they are taken out of the water, so they are subjected to asphyxia. They cannot breathe air, so they cannot breathe. And then can be kept in different media at a low temperature: ice slurry and ice flakes. Ice slurry is a mixture of ice and water. Again, during this phase, a fish can take over half an hour, 40 minutes to die. Okay, so during this phase, we impose to the animals as stronger stress, sometimes a stronger stress that any stress we can cause them in the water. And then there is the processing and how the fish is transported and packaged. Here are the calculation of risk factors, again for sea bass and sea bream, during pre-slaughter and slaughter. And you can see here that, for example, fasting, we can choose, the aquaculture farmer can choose according to the species or the type of plants, if before fishing the individual can starve them for a long period, or to have different short repeated periods of starvation. Crowding. Crowding can be a risk factor, depends on the design of the fishing nets. If the collection is too fast, if the water where they are temporarily kept before going on the vessels is not suitable, pH, the temperature, ammonia, and so on, prolonged crowding, and so on. Then we have the moment we take out the animals from the water, and this depends on the length. It depends on if the fishing procedure is manual or mechanical or so on. And you can see that that manual fishing has a low risk factor. Okay. The same, we can calculate the risk score during the slaughter phase. Asphyxia, if we leave the animals to just exposed to the air, the risk score is the maximum. Okay, but another source of asphyxia is the compression. You could put too many fishes together. There is not space enough for them to breathe. Temperature, in general, we put the fish in iced water. The ice slurry corresponds to a mixture of water and ice at a temperature around 2 degrees. And again, here it depends on the crowding in the tanks and the number of animals we kill with this method. The thermic shock with ice has a high risk of asphyxia, because the ice doesn't allow, there is no water, so the animal can't breathe at all, and so the risk is very high. Okay, this just to mention that there are regulations, there are indications, and we can calculate the impact of each factor from the production to the slaughtering of the animals to guarantee or to minimize the animal welfare. We are very far from the optimal condition, but a lot has been done on fish in the, we say, in the last decade. But aquaculture is not just fish. As we can go to the previous graph on the species production in tons and their economic value in euros, we have seen that there are 3 main species of mollusks: mussels, oysters, and clams. They are bivalve mollusks that represent a significant portion of aquaculture production and economic value. What does Europe to deal with the welfare of shellfish? Essentially, this is on the shoulders of local farmers, because shellfish aquaculture is so old, and it has such a long tradition. We've seen that it dates back to the Romans, that local farmers know how to deal to with mussels, oysters, and so on, to facilitate and to maintain the good health condition of the organism, and also to protect and monitor the environment when these animals grow. In general, shellfish aquaculture is represented by small facilities, and the rearing of shellfish is often provided by local population. So the care the farmer utilize is in general sufficient, because the farmer know when the environmental conditions are changes and can recognize very easy what is happening in the plant. The problem is that despite this, we have observed in the last decades a huge number of mortality episodes in shellfish hatcheries that are due to both environmental conditions, but also to climate change conditions. So if you're interested in good husbandry practices in shellfish, again, here there is a recent document for the European Union, 2023. But if we look at the problem of bivalve mortalities worldwide, we can take an example, that of the European oyster. I don't know if you're keen in eating oyster. I don't, I'm not. But in Europe, the natural population of oyster was represented once by the flat oyster, Oystra edulis. That is called belon in France. And native oyster reefs were once abundant in European seas and were unfortunately affected by overfishing. So we know that by the middle of the 19th centuries, the natural oyster population, flat oyster, Oystra edulis, declined by 95%. Okay, the first reason was overfishing, traditional overfishing, but also the problem was represented by two parasites, Martellia and Bonamia, that invaded the oyster communities in the middle 70s. And these parasites reached Europe just through trade globalization. They were absent in European seas before. These parasites decimated the oyster population. Oysters were not able to combat these parasites. So for this species, we are just a few sites of natural population all over Europe. Now, if you go and buy oysters, you buy Cassosteria gigas, which is the Pacific oyster, which has been utilized to substitute for the natural population of Oystra edulis. And now, Cassosteria gigas is the most common oyster species aquaculture in Europe. Okay? Because we have to consider that native oyster reefs are considered one of the most threatened and endangered habitats in Europe. The problem is also that these species have also a slow growing rate and slow recruitment. So their success of maintaining the population is easily hampered by environmental factors, for example. Here is the histogram showing the production of Oystra edulis from the 50s to nowadays, more or less. And you can see that there have been periods of dramatic decrease in production. And these changes were attributed to problems of emergence of the parasite Martellia in France, the introduction of sea just in France to substitute for the loss of Ostrea edulis, bonamiosis emergence in France, and so on. But now you can see that from the middle of the 80s, the French oyster production, France, of course, is the biggest production of oysters in Europe, 98% already in the 80s was represented by sea carcass. And then, in general, the decline also in production in tons, also for carcass. What are the drivers of natural oyster population decline? Anthropogenic factors, so the fishing first, habitat lost, but also we saw that pathogens, invasive species, and so on can affect their welfare, and that's also the survival. Of course, water quality and pollution, together with overfishing, have contributed to the decimating this population. Of course, it's extremely sensitive species to any environmental change. But here in this report, you can see the impact on population leading to reduced brood stock, reduced larval input and survival, and also larval settlement and survival. In this view, protection of these organisms during the larval stage is essential to provide recruitment for the new populations. Now, there are different European projects that are devoted to restoration of Ostrea edulis population. Of course, this is important because if we are able to replace native oyster population, this will have an impact, a positive impact on the environment, because filtering oyster will increase water clarity, will increase exchange of food through the food webs, also providing feed for fish. There is also the cultural value, because some communities, especially both in the Mediterranean, but also in the Northern Sea in Europe, were living on oyster fishing. And in general, this will contribute to improved water quality. But this subject is extremely followed by the European Union with grants and organization to provide ecological restoration of oyster edulis. As you can see here, there are just few sites remained in Europe where there is the wild collection of native oysters, some in Ireland, in UK, in France, and so on, and also in Yugoslavia. In other places, hatchery breeding pond, breed pond, does it mean? That are places where the larvae taken from natural population are reared and grown. This growth system of oysters or general bivalves can be very different. This is an example on a site of oyster seed collection in Italy, and this is one in Ireland. Of course, all the procedures are now well established to guarantee not only the production of food and the economic value, but also to restore the natural populations. So if we could summarize which are the main biological causes of decline in the bivalve population worldwide, we have to consider different aspects, not only those we have considered for Ostrea edulis in particular. Because related to climate changes and pollution, we are observing increased frequency and duration of algal blooms. Many of these algae are toxic and they proliferate along the coast. This, of course, alters the water quality, even if the algae are not toxic, but can be toxic to aquaculture shellfish. In general, in coastal areas where the impact of human population is very high, where the human population density is very high, and when the health system do not work very well, in case of gastroenteritis, influenza, or simply in case of environmental factors, heavy rainfall, there is a microbiological contamination with bacteria and with virus that can contaminate coastal water and so also shellfish. But we now know that in the last decades, main mortality outbreaks in different bivalve populations, not only oysters, but also mussels, clams, and so on, occurred. These were due to the parasites, Martellia and Bonamia, that we underline as the main Ostrea edulis parasites, but they can be parasites also of the Pacific oysters and also other bivalve species. Viruses, for example, for oyster herpes virus type 1, but these are monitored by local health authorities, and different bacteria, mainly bacteria of the Vibrio species, which are marine bacteria, and then include different species that can be pathogenic to bivalves in general, to certain bivalve species. For example, Vibrio splenus is highly pathogenic to oysters, but not to mussels. Other Vibrio are pathogenic to clams, and so on. So the general problem of infection with epizootics, together with changes in environmental factors, represent a main threat to bivalve population worldwide. In general, we have to consider that shellfish farming is highly vulnerable to epizootics, so to infection with parasites, bacteria, and viruses. So farming practices should be adapted and monitored to guarantee animal health and to avoid the spread of this disease. Despite this, we know that different bivalve population, apart from oysters, die. What do we mean with mortality outbreaks? The observation of high episodes of mortality in a short time. And apparently these mortality outbreaks that can completely kill all the specimens, all the individuals in a plant, is not predictable. So there is epizootic surveillance throughout the year. So the water is generally controlled. The water where the animals are grown is controlled for pathogens, for parasites, and so on. Despite this, and despite in some cases, the absence of environmental stressors, for example, an increase in temperature, different bivalves die. And this implies a great economic loss for the farm. Here you can see that Mytilus edulis and Mytilus galloprovincialis, the mussels, which are considered resistant species, much resistant to environmental stress or pathogens with respect to oysters, have suffered mortality episodes that started in the middle of more or less 2005, and all these episodes for Mytilus edulis and for Mytilus galloprovincialis, this is the mussel for the Mediterranean mussel. This is the mussel we have in the North Sea. As you can see, from about 2050, there has been a steady increase in mortalities as documented by scientific studies. What are the causes? Here is a tentative in this review to establish a relationship between all the possible variables that can affect the mortality of Mytilus edulis and Mytilus galloprovincialis. What are the variables? The type of site, the climate condition, the seawater quality, the presence of pollutants, the presence of pathogens, or the aquaculture practice. And you can see that in most cases, there is no synergy among the factors. we could observe here, for example, a synergy with site and practice for Mytilus, but in general, there is no apparent relationship between seawater quality or whatever. So it's very difficult to predict massive mortalities of bivalves in Europe and all over the world. This is a problem because this is the decline of mussel aquaculture in European Union. Once we knew that oysters were vulnerable to pollution, climate changes, pathogens, but mussels have been considered for a long time a resilient species. So there was no problem in mussel cultivation. And as you can see from the first graphs I show you, Mytilus is one of the main species for both production in tons and also for economic value. But look at this. In the rest of the world, the production of mussels is steadily increasing, and in Europe is steady, is not growing. And this is due to different problems. In this analysis, they tried to grade the positive and negative aspects of different variables for that could affect mussel aquaculture in Europe. Of course, we'll not go through the detail, but many of these weak and strong points are those that we have mentioned so far. The problem is that once there was no concern about mussel aquaculture, but now mussel aquaculture is one of the most controlled aquaculture type in Europe because of this incredible decline during the last year. Another additional stress related directly to climate change that can affect bivalve population are marine heat waves. What is a heat wave? As I told you before, is in sudden increase in temperature over the average value, and this can apply to air, to water, whatever. Marine heat waves are extended period of a regional ocean warming. Okay, in a short time there is a great increase in temperature for a few hours, but the increase in temperature can be so high with respect to normal temperature for that season in that place that can lead to animal mortalities. All animals, of course, a fish can move, but bivalves and other sessile invertebrates of the macrobenthos cannot move. So they are exposed to this sudden increase in temperature. Here is an example of temperature changes across the year from February to November. These are the minimum and maximum temperature, and here are the peaks of heat waves that are increasing temperature well over the average temperature of the field. The problem is for those animals that live in the tidal zone, because many aquaculture farms, not in the Mediterranean, but at higher latitudes in Europe, are subjected to strong tidal waves. And during the low tide, the animals can be exposed to air. But if the temperature is very high, that can lead to mass mortalities. There are pictures of mortality episodes involving bivalves or other organisms. Billion sea creatures cooked to death due to heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. The same in Spain. Because in these conditions, especially in the spring, summer, during the low tide, the air temperature can reach up to 50 degrees. And of course, animals die. They cannot escape because they cannot move. So since the heat waves are becoming more frequent and intense in the recent years, researchers now focus on how to understand the welfare of these species and to understand how resilient they can be to sudden temperature increase, if it can acclimate, that is, to adapt to increasing frequencies of high temperatures, to see if there are populations that can resist them, so can be selected for aquaculture, whereas other populations are more vulnerable and so cannot be chosen, also on the basis of their genetic background for aquaculture. So there is a lot of experimentation in the lab trying to simulate different heat waves at different temperatures. For example, here, 50 degrees for 6 hours, 40 degrees for 6 hours for animals that in the summer were in a temperature of about 27 degrees. And in this simulation, we can follow of course, the survival of the mussel or the clams or whatever bivalve we are focusing on, and to study the molecular, functional, and physiological responses to the heat wave. And in this way, we can understand the mechanism that can lead these animals to adapt to these ongoing climate changes, to adapt to the increase in frequencies of heat waves, to adapt to the higher values of temperature during extreme temperature events. So again, we go back to the fact that the research is fundamental to understand animal welfare, their adaptation to the environment, their capacity to fight potential pathogens, and so on, in any environmental condition, and of course, in aquaculture. So the take-home message here is very simple. Welfare of fish and shellfish species depends on several abiotic factors as well by aquaculture practice. And if on one end, for the main species of aquaculture fish in Europe at least, we have a regulation based on scientific data that can help us to reduce the risk of affecting animal health during growth and also during pre-slaughtering and slaughtering. For shellfish, and in particular for bivalves, the climate change and vulnerability to different types of epizootics, bacteria, viruses, and protozoans represent the main threats to survival and health. So again, here research is still needed to understand how the most aquaculture bivalve species can react, can respond to different stressors, epizootics, climate changes, pollution, or whatever, in order to protect them and to avoid the mortality episodes that are affecting bivalve aquaculture worldwide. I think that